Hi, let me share with you the tale of Peter Rabbit. The pictures and the story are both by Beatrix Potter. This book is part of what's called the public domain. It means anybody can use it, and it's made available through something called Project Gutenberg. Now, once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. Which one do you think is Peter? I think it's this saucy looking one right here. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go to the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I am going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. That would be 1 for her, 1 for Flopsy, 1 for Mopsy, 1 for Cottontail, and 1 for Peter. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went looking for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and he ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Oh, Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he'd forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. Can you see Peter's shoe right there? After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so I think he might have gotten away altogether if he'd not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net. He got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was blue jacket, and with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost, and he shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. That means begged him to try to get free. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind. And he rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hiding underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Can you see Peter there in the watering pot? Well, presently, Peter sneezed. Ka-choo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. And he tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, not very fast, and looking around. He found a door in the wall, but it was locked. and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she couldn't answer. She only shook her head, and Peter began to cry. You see the tear there in his eye? Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was staring at some gold fish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He'd heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. Do you see Peter there, behind the cat? He went back toward the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttled underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Do you see the garden gate there in the distance? Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. You see Mr. McGregor chasing him right there? Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to the big fir tree. I don't think that the blackbirds are particularly scared of Peter's jacket and shoes, do you? When he got home, he was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. There he is. Oh, his mother was busy cooking, and she wondered what he'd done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. That's 2 weeks. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoonful to be taken at bedtime. And I just noticed this from the front cover. Look at this. Here's Peter's mom giving him his medicine. He doesn't seem real happy about it, does he? But as for Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, they had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The